NATO is facing arguably its toughest period since the Cold War. Internal disputes and the conflict in Ukraine are challenging the alliance like never before. I'm Melinda Nusofora, and I'm sitting down with the USA's former permanent representative to NATO, Douglas Lute, for one-on-one. Douglas Lute, thank you so much for your time here on TRT
It's good
World.
to be with you.
Let's begin with the conflict in Ukraine. We can't really begin these discussions without focusing on that. Has the conflict in Ukraine or other global conflicts reshaped or changed NATO, or has it simply solidified NATO's pre-existing positions?
I think the conflict has done both. So first of all, it has solidified the alliance. I mean, I was the NATO ambassador for the US from 2013 to 2017. I would say during that period under President Obama, I thought the alliance was quite cohesive, but I think it's all-time cohesive now. And largely it's because NATO recognizes that what it has feared for years, which was that there was a potential threat from Russia, has now proven to be true. Because Russia has not only stated the intention to invade, it has actually done it. So it has demonstrated that it is in fact a threat, and that's had a very cohering sense. But it's also, I think the weight of the alliance has shifted eastward. I mean, so the new NATO allies in the Central and Eastern European states, now constituting essentially the eastern flank of the alliance, are really the center of gravity for the alliance, because it's from these states that the alliance is supporting Ukraine. So it has both been a consolidating or cohering effect, but also a shift eastward.
And how do you see that shift to eastward continuing? Is that something that you think will remain? Will those players then take on that new role and want to have more of an impact on NATO, or do you think things will balance out again?
Well, the economics of the alliance suggests that while the military effort can shift eastward, the big economic powers of the alliance will remain Germany and France and the UK and Italy and so forth. So the shift may not be permanent towards the eastern powers, but as long as the war in Ukraine is being waged, I think the military effort will remain in the east.
What about NATO expansion? I mean, Vladimir Putin always said at the beginning that this war was about preventing NATO expansion. It obviously has extended beyond that now, but it almost seems as if that's been a self-fulfilling prophecy, and what he didn't want to happen has actually now spurred other countries to want to join. Apart from Sweden and Finland, do you think other countries will want to take part in the alliance?
Well, there are two other aspirant countries now. Those are nations that have stated their national ambition to join the alliance. So Bosnia and Herzegovina is on that list, Georgia is on that list, and Ukraine has been on the list and been off the list over the years. So there are countries that are in the queue to join the alliance. And I think that this most recent Russia invasion of Ukraine will only spark their interest in joining NATO. But as you state, this has always been a national decision. So for the 30 current members of the alliance, each of those 30 memberships began with a national judgment that it was in the national interest of the member states to join. So NATO doesn't recruit anyone. I mean, we're not in the recruiting business. It begins with a national choice. And most recently, I think, this is made evident by way of Sweden and Finland's decision that given this security environment, and given the evidence that Putin really may invade someone, as he has Ukraine, that it's in their interest to join the alliance.
Turkey has maintained its position that it doesn't feel as if Sweden and Finland have put enough actions behind their words with regard to alleviating Turkey's concerns about harbouring terrorism, etc. What do you make of the way that the alliance is dealing with Turkey's concerns?
Well, first of all, I think it's important for all the members of the alliance to understand this from Turkey's perspective. No other member of the alliance among the 30 has suffered the sort of casualties that Turkey has suffered at the hands of the PKK and related militant groups. So it's really important to understand that. And it's hard to judge Turkey's motives from outside Turkey if you haven't lived that experience. As for the Swedish and Finnish response to Turkish concerns, I understand that there are bilateral conversations going on and that both Sweden and Finland have made progress towards responding to President Erdogan's request for national steps. I think at the end of the day that Turkey will be satisfied, but it's just not there yet.
You're also, on top of being a former US permanent representative to NATO, you're a former national security advisor as well. So the US has said that it is going to stay with Ukraine for as long as it takes. But as we inch closer to that 1 year mark, and as the bill gets higher and higher with supporting the country as this conflict extends, do you see Western support wavering?
I don't. I don't see the signs of that wavering yet. But we should be realistic about this. As inflation hits the democracies of the Western Alliance, to include all the way reaching the United States, as the energy crisis takes hold this winter, we'll have to see. The one thing that is very important for all of us to remember, it seems obvious, but sometimes we forget, NATO is made up of 30 democracies. So the impact on the domestic politics of the 30 member states is very important. And democratic electorates listen to inflation, they listen to energy prices, they listen to the demands from the Democratic electorate. So over time, it's conceivable that those sorts of domestic political pressures may have an impact, but we haven't seen that yet.
You're joining us here on the sidelines of the TRT World Forum, and you've just come out of a roundtable discussion about transatlantic relations. So let me ask you about NATO's relationship with China. Is its relationship with Russia putting strain on its relationship with China as well?
No, I don't think so. NATO should be able to do both. That is, contend with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which it's doing in a very robust way, but also imagine a relationship with China. And here the relationship with China is less a military competition than it is accounting for China's commercial infiltration by way of commercial investments and so forth in critical infrastructure here on the European continent. And by critical infrastructure, I mean transportation networks, communications networks, mass communications networks, like the introduction of Huawei as a 5G provider and so forth. And of course, the Chinese model begins with commercial investment in ports and 5G networks. But there's an expectation in the Chinese model that those commercial investments will pay off politically downstream. And this is what I think. A bit of
soft diplomacy.
Well, it's a sort of a soft infiltration of the European economy. So this is really what NATO, I think, alongside the EU as a key partner in NATO, what we need to pay increased attention to, because these infrastructures, whether it's the Greek port of Piraeus, the German port of Hamburg, or 5G networks across the continent, are really dual purpose infrastructure. So they're used first and foremost by the civilian population and the civilian economy, but they also serve military purposes. So this is where NATO needs to pay more attention and be more aware of Chinese influence.
Let's talk US and Türkiye relations. We have seen this week the removal of some conditions that were in place with regards to the sale of F-16s to Türkiye. How do you see the US-Türkiye defense relationship? Is it getting better?
It seems to be moving forward slowly.
It's a slow inch, isn't it?
It's sort of step by step. And of course, it took a major step in the opposite direction with the Turkish purchase of the S-400 air defense system and the US response, which denied Turkey access to the F-35 program. So we seem to be somewhat recovering from that very rough period of bilateral relations by way of the F-16. And look, the F-16 is still a world-class capability. And I believe at the end of the day, the US and Turkey will find their way to conclude this deal. And partly this is because of the key strategic role Turkey plays as an ally to the US, but also as sort of the anchor of the southeast corner of Europe, and therefore the southeast corner of NATO.
I was going to ask you that as we near the end of our interview. How do you see the tensions between the US and Turkey playing out in NATO? Have you confidently been able to see those two countries and their diplomats be able to put those aside and work jointly, or has it affected the alliance?
Well, look, NATO takes all its big decisions on the basis of consensus. So today that means the big decisions have to be decided at a vote of 30-0. So all 30 members have to agree. So when there are bilateral disputes, so for example between the United States and Turkey, that can sometimes complicate NATO decision making. But the long history of the alliance, now over 70 years, has been time and again, has been evidenced by getting past the bilateral issues and voting on behalf of the overall good for the alliance. And I have confidence that by way of the leadership here in Turkey, the leadership in the United States, the leadership at NATO headquarters by way of Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, that we'll get past any bilateral issues.
And do you think that the conflict on NATO's border is encouraging NATO allies to put aside their own maybe personal issues and focus on the whole?
I think there's no question, and Turkey is part of that. I mean, the Turkish support, in fact, the Turkish leadership in crafting with the UN Secretary General the grain deal with Russia, which at least begins to alleviate some of the world hunger crisis, is a case in point. But also Turkey's providing perhaps the most lethal unmanned aerial system in the Ukrainian inventory. So Turkey's been a very strong ally here. And Turkey remains very helpfully a diplomatic opening, a diplomatic channel to the Kremlin. Eventually, in this war, that will be important.
It looks as if it could be the only way we're going to get some diplomatic resolutions. Douglas Lute, thank you so much for your time here on TRT World One on One.
Thank you.